empire of Ripple, a sage. But there's one thing that I don't think I have ever been called, and that is a great orator. So, I was bred up the son of a candle maker. I was not sent to a college nor a school of rhetoric. I'm afraid you can't expect from me the soaring expressions of a Richard Henry Lee nor the fiery passion of a George Whitefield. But I shall attempt to make my remarks at least useful, by which term I mean amusing and instructive. Now, in the spring of 1776, I found myself a member of the Great Continental Congress in Philadelphia. We had been at war with our mother country, or rather, I should say, she had been at war with us for above a year. The king had long since declared us outside his protection and subject to the depredations of his armies and fleets. And yet we continued reluctant to accept the obvious that we were no longer within the British Empire. We were reluctant to assert finally and permanently our independency. But as it seemed inevitable that that event should occur, the Congress appointed a committee to draw up a Declaration of Independence, to have it, as it were, in hand, should it be needed. Now, this was on the 11th of June. There were 5 of us appointed to that committee: Mr. Roger Sherman of Connecticut, Mr. Robert Livingston of New York, Mr. John Adams of Massachusetts Bay, your own Mr. Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, and myself. It was, in some respects, a rather peculiar situation in which to find myself. I had not long past returned from near 20 years' residence in London. And during those 20 years, I had bent my every effort to heal the breach between the colonies and their mother country, to preserve the British Empire entire. That precious china bowl that I thought, with proper usage, might serve for many generations to come. I had come at last to the conclusion, however, that the only way a union between the colonies and England could be preserved was by the surrender of our ancient rights as Englishmen, and to accept a subordinate situation within that empire to be governed entirely by the Crown and Parliament of Great Britain. And that sort of union was no union at all. And therefore I was, if anything, now impatient for the final separation. Yet we of the committee were in agreement that a simple act of separation was not sufficient, that only a fool acts without consideration of the opinions of others, that an action so unprecedented must be justified and explained, that was, as Mr. Jefferson put it, that a decent respect for the opinions of mankind necessitated that sort of fuller explanation. And so we set about to compose this Declaration of Independence, to put at great length precisely the necessity that required it. We were in agreement, pretty much, the committee, as to what this instrument should contain. We wished nothing in it that was novel or original. We wished nothing that would startle the ear. We wished simply to put forward the common sense of the question, to express the general opinion of our fellow countrymen upon this matter, and to put that forward in terms so plain and firm that others would be compelled to assent. So having laid out the essential form of it, then it came for someone to write it. Have any of you ever served on a committee? In my experience, very often the most onerous task that a committee must perform is put upon the youngest member of it because his elders are able to impose it upon him. And so it was in this case. But Mr. Jefferson was given the task of drafting the Declaration, not merely because he was the youngest of us and we could compel him to do it, but also because Mr. Jefferson is possessed of a remarkable felicity of expression. He had proved himself on many occasions to be a fine writer. Mr. Adams maintained he was 10 times better than anyone else in Congress. And so it seemed fitting that he should undertake that task. And he did so in so admirable a way, in so eloquent a way, that when he presented his final work to Mr. Adams and to myself separately, neither of us could find much wrong with it. Oh, we made a few suggestions, a few little changes were made, but nothing of any great moment. And then the matter was put before the whole committee of 5, and we all considered it, and we agreed that it was much as we would wish it to be, and so it was left and submitted to the Congress for their eventual consideration. I confess I can only remember one alteration I made to it at the time. Mr. Jefferson had written, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable." I was not easy with that. Sacred means very different things to different people. To my mind, it smacked too much of speculative religion, and I wish to put it upon a different foundation. We ought to look upon these truths rather as we would look upon the law of gravitation. We do not hold the law of gravity to be sacred. We hold it to be self-evident, to be demonstrably true to any objective observer. And that is what I thought the truths that we were attempting to express ought to be. And so I suggested that the sacred and undeniable be taken out and the word self-evident be substituted. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Mr. Jefferson agreed to that. And I can't think of another thing I contributed. Now, on the 2nd of July at last, the moment came. The Congress solemnly resolved on that 2nd of July that these united colonies are and ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved of all allegiance to the British Crown, and that any political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved.
Good.
And so the matter was done. The question of independence was established, at least within the Congress. Now, for our public declaration of such to the world. And so the Congress began to consider the paper Mr. Jefferson had written. Consider it. In Mr. Jefferson's view, butcher it. For again, for those of you who have ever served on a committee, every man must needs play his part. He could not simply sit and let others decide. Everyone must have this change, or that word altered, or this part taken out, or this part added to it. And every cut, every alteration, Mr. Jefferson felt with a great pain, as though someone were carving up his dearest child. He had written a considerable section on how that if only we had been treated properly by our mother country, we would have been pleased to remain in union with her. That we had no wish to separate from our English brethren, except that their ill usage forced us to that separation. All that was cut out. Mr. Jefferson had placed a particular section denouncing the king for his support of and preservation of the slave trade. Denouncing the war made upon the innocent Africans and so on. by that trade in the way in which the royal government had supported and defended it. That was taken out. At last, Mr. Jefferson was rather in despair about the whole thing. I tried to comfort him. I told him a little tale. I said, Mr. Jefferson, when I was a boy, when a young man, just starting out, a friend of mine was an apprentice hatter. And when he completed his apprenticeship, he was determined to open a shop of his own. And his first consideration was to have a handsome signboard to hang before his shop. And he designed one. It was to have a picture of a hat and this inscription: John Thompson, hatter, makes and sells the finest hats for ready money. He thought that very handsome and expressed what he wished to express. He submitted the design to some of his friends. The first said, for ready money? Why have that there? No one sells on credit hereabouts. Everyone who comes in will expect to pay. You don't need the words for ready money on there. So that was taken off. Another said, why call yourself a hatter? It's all about hats. You got a picture of a hat. Everyone's going to know you're a hatter. No point in having that word on there. So hatter was cut off. Another said, you say makes and sells the finest hats. Well, every tradesman claims that his goods are the best. Everyone expects you to make that sort of claim. There's no point in having that word finest on there. It's just wasted words. Take it out. So they took that out. And then another friend said, makes and sells. Well, what heavens, nobody cares who makes the hats. If they're good quality and to their liking, they'll buy them, made by whoever it is. And so he was left with John Thompson sells hats.